We are now joined by Stephanie Murray, and Stephanie works for Politico.com and covers the Massachusetts political scene. She's a regular here guest on the show. We always appreciate her making some time for us to tell us what she's seeing out there in the world. Good morning, Stephanie. How are you doing?
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm working remote. I'm doing my radio show from my dining room table, which is, I've been doing it for weeks now. I don't know if it's ever going to end, but at least I'm working, right? And as are you, and so that's good. Stephanie, you've got a lot of work done here on this vote-by-mail proposal that's coming up in the state. It's Joe Kennedy is pushing it hard. Explain to people what Congressman Kennedy and these other folks are trying to do.
So this is something that's really interesting, and the concern is that because of the coronavirus pandemic, people will not be comfortable, or it won't be safe for people to go vote in person at the polls in September for the statewide primary in Massachusetts, or even for the general election in November. So what Joe Kennedy wants to do is mail a ballot to every single registered voter in Massachusetts, and so that they can mail their ballot back in and vote that way, which is something that's kind of unprecedented in the state. And so Secretary of State Bill Galvin, the state's elections chief, has raised some concerns about sending a ballot to every single person, especially with so many independent voters. Which party ballot would they get? Those are kind of the questions that he's raising. So what he wants to do is give people the option to vote by mail or to come vote in person.
So, Stephanie, I'm perplexed a little bit by this, having been both a candidate and run a lot of campaigns, as well as, being here in the media. The idea that we're just going to mail ballots to everybody here in the state seems like there's room for a lot of error to just mail ballots to everyone. Well,
this is part of the issue, is that officials, if they do something like this, if they adopt some version of this, they have to do it quickly. The Secretary of State's office says they basically need this to be figured out by June, because that's when they start to print the ballots. So I think you're right. There is a lot of room for error, especially something that hasn't been done before, and they're on kind of a tight timeline to get it done. But the state can look to other states, especially in the West. California does a lot of its election via vote by mail. The case is the same in Washington. So it's not totally unprecedented in other parts of the country, but here in Massachusetts, it would be a huge change.
And currently, we can vote by absentee ballot by mail anyway. So there really is a vote by mail system that's been working for at least, 50 years, I would say, in place, right? Are they thinking to replace the entire absentee ballot process?
Well, there are so many proposals out there right now. A number of bills have been filed in the state legislature on Beacon Hill. But basically the issue that Kennedy's been talking about and others is that right now you need an excuse to vote with an absentee ballot if you have a disability or you're elderly or you're going to be on vacation. What they want to do is kind of take away that hurdle so people can do no-fault absentee voting or vote by mail without an excuse, because basically all of our excuses that we don't want to go to the polls where germs might be unsafe.
Right. So, Stephanie, one final question on this. Has anyone attached a number to how much this is going to cost?
That's another big question mark. It's interesting to talk about because it's going to have to happen so soon if it does. But I was on a call earlier this month with Joe Kennedy, Ayanna Presley, a number of members of the delegation, and some voting rights groups, and they were saying that there's a decent amount of federal money out there for this. The state could use federal grants and other federal funding, and the total cost of the state would probably be around $10 million.
Oh, just $10 million. All right. So let's do it. Let's get to, as my father used to say. That's a very interesting thing. So we'll be watching that. We're speaking with Stephanie Murray from Politico, who covers Politico.com. She covers Massachusetts. Elizabeth Warren had a big bump the last week, I would say. Maybe it was the week before. It all melds together. As a possible candidate for vice president, of course, she being our senior senator. Have you seen any movement on that, hearing anything about Liz Warren as a potential vice presidential candidate?
I've got to tell you, the last time I was on the show was right after Super Tuesday, before she even dropped out, before any of the social distancing started. So it feels like we're in kind of a totally different universe. But right. I think that people should consider her on a short list for the vice presidential pick, along with people like Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Gretchen Whitmer. When she was on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow a couple weeks ago, Rachel asked her if she would take the VP slot, and she answered yes very confidently. She's been on all of these different Instagram live streams with people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Miley Cyrus. She's been really out front. She kept a low profile for a little bit while Bernie was still in the race. And now I think her being so out there gives you a hint that she's definitely vying for that VP spot, and she would take it. So I'm assuming Joe Biden must be considering her because she was in the race for so long.
Yeah, and he, of course, committed himself to taking a female vice presidential candidate, which, there's only so many, quite frankly, people out there. And so if you said you were going to take a male, you would have eliminated all the females. And in this case, he said a female, so he eliminated all the males. And so she's certainly on the short. She would have to be on the short list, going forward. Do you have a sense on the timetable, Stephanie, on that decision?
I'm not sure. I mean, Biden has kind of given some hints and some information about who's going to be running his transition team. So I think it'll come maybe sooner than later. We're operating in this bizarre kind of world where there's probably not going to be a Democratic National Convention this summer in the way that we've known it before. But to go back to why Elizabeth Warren might make sense as his VP pick, she is a progressive, so she could kind of pull in that side of the party that he didn't do as well with. And she also has a really powerful fundraising base. She just really cleaned up with small dollar donors, similar to Bernie Sanders. And that's another area where Biden struggled. So those might be two factors that make her appeal to him. But on the other hand, progressives are still kind of bitter towards her for not endorsing Bernie after she dropped out. So that might be kind of something that holds them back.
Yeah, there is some bad blood there, as there always is at the conclusion, though, really, of presidential primaries and any kind of inter-party fight. Which, speaking of which, we have one of the biggest going on, even though it's maybe kind of on the sidelines right now. Joe Kennedy and United States Senator Markey, of course, are vying for the Democrat nomination. As you've pointed out in one of your pieces, that some of this vote by mail may appeal to the people that Joe Kennedy needs to win this primary, and that even Paleologos, I think, in one of your pieces from Suffolk, says that that could favor Kennedy. I'm not casting aspersions on his motivations, but where does that race stand now, Stephanie, as you see it?
That race is all over the internet. They are going live on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter like multiple times a day. For me as a reporter, it's almost hard to keep up, but it's definitely interesting how they've had to kind of retool their campaigns. They can't do anything in person. They ramped up their field organizers, the people that go knock on doors and things like that. Now you can't go knock on a door. So they're all looking at different ways to kind of reach out to people over the phone, over different means online. Ed Markey's campaign has really embraced kind of his younger fan set who are in their teens or early 20s, and they've been posting a lot of memes. So it's interesting to see. But it is interesting that Joe Kennedy, the vote by mail could really benefit him because incumbents usually are benefited by low turnout elections, and then challengers usually do better at a high turnout election. So if everybody gets mailed a ballot, you get a better chance of high turnout.
Yeah, no, I totally, completely agree with that analysis of it. That is it. You need more people who have never voted for the incumbent to go to the polls, because if the same people go with feeling the same way, you get the same results. Stephanie, probably one of the ugliest things going on in politics right now is this accusation against Joe Biden that he sexually assaulted a former staff member. How is it? It seems as if it's ramping up a little bit in the media, but there has been, a little bit of a lack of coverage on this thing. How are people dealing with that within the female community, and particularly here in Massachusetts? Again, the people who didn't support Joe Biden seem to be pushing this a little bit. What are your thoughts?
I would say that just because you aren't hearing about it in media coverage right now doesn't mean that reporters aren't working on it.
Okay.
Sexual assault allegations are very tricky, and they take a long time to investigate before they show up in newspapers or elsewhere. And it takes, hours of interviews, tons of corroboration, and a lot of investigative reporting work. So if you see kind of the missing piece is reading less about it. I think that might be part of it. But, the other thing is whoever Joe Biden chooses as his vice president as a woman will probably have to answer for these allegations as a woman. There was a great piece in New York Magazine about this a couple of days ago. So it's definitely an interesting and kind of a tricky component, but, I don't think we know everything about it yet, and I'd just say stay tuned.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good. I didn't talk about it until yesterday, quite frankly. I've been following the story, but it's first of all, it's a very unpleasant topic, right? Because his campaign says never happened. So either he's lying or she's lying, and so it's a very uncomfortable thing. I have a lot of sympathy all the way around on this story. I don't know how the whole thing's going to shake out, and I feel in some ways bad for whatever woman he selects as his vice presidential candidate for having to answer for it, because it's an impossible thing to answer for. How do you answer charges against another person that took place in 1993, right? So it's a sad thing, quite frankly, but we'll see as it goes. But I do think that's an excellent way to put it, Stephanie. I do appreciate that. You say stay tuned just because you're not hearing anything, and people are working the story. I appreciate that. Stephanie, what else is going on in Massachusetts that my listeners should know about and coming out of your pen over there at Politico.com?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm keeping my eye on the 4th District congressional race to replace Joe Kennedy. That's another interesting race and another place where folks have kind of had to shift their campaigns onto the internet, doing different creative things like virtual town halls, creating coloring book pages, all sorts of stuff. So I'm keeping my eye on that race, especially with so many candidates and nobody can go knock on a door right now. It's tough.
Right, and that's part of our listening audience does share part of that district, because it comes down to Fall River and over to Lakeville and that part of the world. So that is actually in this listening audience, and it has it's all a Democrat race, though, right? There is no, as far as I can tell, no Republican getting into the race. Not that I know of, but there are so many candidates that I might be missing someone. But they've already raised so much money. 2 of the candidates have already crossed, the $1 million threshold since they got in the race last year. They've raised $1 million, and they've spent a lot of that, but they've raised it. So tons of money in this race. You can expect to see it on your TV all summer long, I'd say. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Stephanie Murray from Politico.com. I really appreciate you making time for it. And that's true. The last time I talked to you, you were walking down the street heading to Liz Warren's house for her announcement that she was dropping out, but we didn't know officially that she was dropping out. That's right. Great memory. I appreciate that. Have a wonderful day. Please be safe, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.